Hi Vermont history students, and welcome back to my basement. And this is the video for Unit 3, which is essentially supposed to be comprised of Monday and Tuesday this week. That's the way that the units are supposed to work. Each week is a part of the semester, and then Monday and Tuesday are the first unit of the week, and Wednesday and Thursday are the second. But today's a holiday. My wife was just saying, you need to come out and do yard work, plant grass seed. And but I said I'll make the video first and also tinker with the course and the outline and everything for a little while. So let's get this done now, but I know it's a strange schedule because it's Memorial Day. So you'll be fine. All I want to do, what I want to do with this video is, number one, explain to you, hopefully well, what the papers are all about, what I call assessment papers. So I'm going to do that for a little while, and then I would like to just give you a brief description of what Unit 3's content is about, at least from what I put up, because it tells you what the two most main important things about uphillers and then about downhillers are. Okay, so as far as the papers go, your first chance to turn in an assessment paper is this Friday. And a little late is okay, you know, it's a summer course. But Fridays are when the assessment papers are due. I'm decided to give you lots of choices for when you can turn in papers this semester. One student really wanted to be able to sort of get their work done early, which is fine. I like giving students choices of when to write papers. You need to write an assessment paper by the second choice, which is a week from Friday. But the first chance, this Friday, is a great time to do it. A good schedule to be on for writing your assessment papers is the 2nd, 4th, and 6th weeks. And this would be the end of the second week. We'll be up to about 1850. And so you would be measuring unity, how unified did Vermonters become in 1850 compared to what it was like in the 1770s or 1780s, something like that. Their papers about change over time. And you don't want to leave it so that you wait a long time to write your first paper or wait too long in between papers, because then you end up getting to 1900 and having to measure unity of Vermont over the course of, 150 years, 130 years, and that's just way too long. So write me a paper this week, send it to me, I'll tell you what you did right, what you can improve on, you'll be fine. Okay, the first assessment paper very much is just for you to know what I'm looking for. And what I'm looking for is a clear thesis statement right at the beginning, right in your introduction, right in your first sentence even, where you say about the period where we're at, 1850 by Thursday, and you tell me whether or not Vermont is more or less unified as a community of Vermonters than it had been at the beginning of that era. And then using course materials, using the textbook, using articles that I put up in the part folder, it says articles for part 2, then you explain to me why you believe that to be the case. And that's what it's about. I'm not asking you on these assessment papers if you think people back then were making good decisions. Because I want to have some kind of a focus and make it easier for you, there's 3 main questions that I use, that I give you in order so that you can measure unity. One is, what is wise use of land? Number 2, how do you make society fair? And number 3, who is a Vermonter? And I'm not asking you if you think people back then used land wisely. I'm asking, did they agree back then? If they agreed back then that the way to use land wisely was to cut down all the trees and destroy the environment, if they all agreed about that, well then they all agreed about there was unity in the state on that question. I'm not interested in whether or not who you think a Vermonter is. It doesn't interest me at all. Did they agree back then, generally speaking, more or less at the end of the period than compared to the beginning, about who was a Vermonter? Did they agree back then? If they all agreed that you could put on a silly hat, a Viking helmet, and it made society fair, then there's unity. Whether or not you agree with that assessment on their part is not, very much not what I'm asking. So did people agree back then, generally speaking, more or less over time, about, were they on the same page? Did they agree? And I give you these 3 questions in order to focus it for you. Make it clear in your introduction what your thesis statement is. Summarize it again, obviously, in your conclusion. Give me nice paragraphs in between that follow the story chronologically. The reason why this assignment is great is because what it allows you to do is tell the story of Vermont, the history of Vermont, as a story over time. And that's what history is. It's a story that you tell yourself, about how you came to be and how things are the way they are. So in the end, you'll be able to link up your 3 assessment papers and be able to have the state wake up around you now. How unified are Vermonters today about these questions, and how comparatively unified are they compared to the past? Did people agree then? Those are the 3 questions. They're no big deal. They're cool. Make sure you look. The assessment paper assignment is in the assessment papers folder. If you have any trouble finding it, just write me and I'll bounce it to you as an attachment. And on citations, it's necessary that you give me citations, but appreciate that it's not the form of citing that interests me that much, it's the spirit of it. And what I need is the author's last name and the page number. I need to be able to retrace your steps, so I need the page or pages where you got information. So if you just tell me Sherman, page 173, you can do it in parenthetical citations, you can give me endnotes or footnotes, whatever makes sense for you. I don't get bogged down on the form of citing. It's kind of boring. But the spirit of citing, and especially giving me the author's name and the page number, or the title and the page number is crucial, so that I can retrace your steps, is what it's all about. So write me a nice paper in which you tell me whether or not Vermont was more unified in 1850 than it had been in the 1780s, and tell me right away what your answer is, and then tell me how you came to that conclusion based on what you've read, and you'll be fine. Now, as far as content goes, I want to make sure at this point in the semester that you have nailed down the uphill-downhill divide. I put down on the introduction to this part the list of characteristics of the first generation, and also have a look at the folder of uphill-downhill maps. Look at Shrewsbury or Pownall. What you'll find is that usually the original uphill village is on top of a hill, and it's usually given the designation center, and that's where the original uphillers settled, on tops of hills, and put their first villages, usually located somewhere near the center of town. And then what happened was, when the downhillers came in and settled in the river valleys and the mill villages, that's usually called, Bennington Village as opposed to Bennington Center. And that's where the downhill center of economic activity and residential life existed. And so you have a clear sense of sort of the spatial and geographical relationship, although you do appreciate that these are bundles of values. They're clashing, mutually coherent and mutually incompatible different worldviews, bundles of values. So once you have the uphill and the downhill characteristics down, then what this unit means to tell you is the most important thing about uphillers and the most important thing about downhillers. And these categories, uphill and downhill, they evolve enormously over time, as you'll see. Downhillers now are very different from what downhillers were like in the 1880s or the 1950s even. Uphillers evolved too. But these are the things that are, at least as in my estimation, are the things that are always true of uphillers and downhillers. First, downhillers. The story is the Bourne-Colvin murder trial, and what happened was, in 1812, this guy whose name was Russell Colvin disappeared. He was out picking rocks with his 2 brothers-in-law, Stephen and Jesse Bourne, in a field in Manchester. They got in an argument. A neighbor overheard the argument, but then took off before he found out what happened in the end. Stephen and Jesse came back to the house and said, "Russell run off." Russell was a poor guy married to their sister who was kind of loose, and Russell and the Bourne father, Stephen and Jesse's father, had said he was going to give the farm to Russell and his daughter. And so Stephen and Jesse were mad about this, but they said Russell ran off. He was a guy who tended to roam anyway, so people didn't think it was that strange. But the years went by, and Russell Colvin never came back. And the family was the Colvins and the Bournes were very uphill families, very sort of poor hill farmers. And 7 years after that, in 1819, all these strange coincidences had built up over time. That they had found some bones on the site. The person who acquired the place where the fight took place had found Russell Colvin's hat and his knife. Russell Colvin never went anywhere without his big floppy hat. And generally what happened was, it came around to Stephen and Jesse being arrested for Russell Colvin's murder. The supporters, friends of Stephen and Jesse Bourne, put an ad in the newspaper when Stephen was close to being executed for the murder, asking if anyone had seen Russell Colvin, because they had claimed he'd run off. And miraculously, a Manchester native who was living in New York City saw the ad and said, "I saw Russell Colvin in New Jersey," and went and found Russell Colvin and took him up to Manchester. And because Russell Colvin had shown up, Stephen Bourne was released, Jesse Bourne was released, and Russell Colvin immediately went back to New Jersey. And after that, the downhillers said, "Was that the real Russell Colvin?" They had no way of knowing, because they didn't know Russell Colvin. They didn't know the uphillers. And of course the uphillers said, "That's all in the past." The important thing of this story being, we don't know if it was the real Russell Colvin. Downhillers, the lawyers, the businessmen in Manchester didn't know. But that's the thing about downhillers, is that uphillers never tell them their secrets. It's true. Downhillers don't understand uphillers. They don't understand why they drink the beer they drink, or why they snowmobile, or why they do, all the things that they do and behave the way they behave. They don't understand it, because they think that uphillers should behave like them, like downhillers. And downhillers are always trying to turn uphillers into downhillers. It's very true. But it's about community, and it's a level of community that you can't penetrate if you are a downhiller, because it's built up over time. Uphillers never tell downhillers their secrets. Number two, the most important thing about uphillers is they don't see the big picture. In the 1830s, when capitalist transformation was underway, things were changing quickly. In my town of Danville, the local businessman had joined was a Mason, was a member of the Masonic Lodge, and you can look up the anti-Masonic movement in the textbook. But anyway, what happened is that he owned the only store in town. Danville was in decline as a village economically, as St. Johnsbury was on the rise. And this businessman who owned the store was was not being generous with credit. And a lot of the uphillers came to hate him, and they hated him because he was a Mason. So what they did was, they drove him out of town. Now, if your town is economically in decline, probably the last thing you want to do is drive out of town the most successful merchant. But that's what they did. Because uphillers don't see the big picture. They don't see how their backyards, the streams that run through the backyards, are connected to the outside world. They don't see why what happens in their town is influenced by things happening around the state. They like things local. Thing about uphillers is they don't see the big picture. The thing about downhillers is they don't understand uphillers. So therefore, when they talk to each other, they're often like, whew, and they don't understand each other at all. And that's the way it is, and that's the way it always will be, I imagine, even though the categories evolve enormously over time. And there you are, and hopefully Unit 3 will be something that you find enjoyable. All right, cool. Thanks.